Blog Talk Radio.
This is the 28th of November 2013 edition of the News in 10 from BR on the World, the people that bring you Bostonred. We are live here at about 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time in New York, from Toronto in Canada. A story here about the G20 summit, which was held in 2010 in Toronto. This is from the Canadian Broadcast Company, and I'll read it briefly. Top secret documents reveal that the U.S. whistleblower Edward Snowden showed that Prime Minister Stephen Harper, he's the Prime Minister of Canada, allowed the largest U.S. spy agency to conduct widespread surveillance in Canada during the 2010 G8 and G20 summits, which we covered. The documents are being reported exclusively by CBC News. The briefing notes the stamped top secret show the U.S. turned its Ottawa embassy into a command post during a 6-day spying operation by the National Intelligence Agency known as NSA. While President Obama and 25 other foreign heads of state were on Canadian soil in June of 2012. The covert U.S. operation was no secret to Canadian authorities. An NSA briefing note describes the American agency's operation plans at a Toronto summit meeting and notes that were closely coordinated with the Canadian partner. The NSA and its Canadian partner, the Communication Security Establishment Canada, gathered foreign intelligence for their respective governments by covertly intercepting phone calls and hacking into computer systems around the world. The secret document does not reveal the precise targets of so much espionage by the NSA and possibly its Canadian partners during the Toronto summit. Both the U.S. and Canadian intelligence agencies have been implicated with the British counterpart in hacking phone calls and emails of foreign politicians and diplomats attending the G20 summit in London. That was in 2009. A scant few months before the Toronto gathering of the same world leaders. Notably, the secret documents describe part of the U.S. eavesdropping mandate of the Toronto summit as providing support to policymakers. The documents previously leaked by Mr. Snowden, a former NSA contractor who sought and received asylum in the Russian Federation, my words, Russian Federation, suggested that supported other international gatherings include spying on foreign diplomats to get an unfair advantage in negotiations of policy debates at the summit. It was those documents that first exposed the spying on world leaders at the London summit. Most recently, Snowden's trove of classified information revealed that Canadian eavesdropping agencies had hacked into phones and computers in the Brazilian government's Department of Mines, a story that touched off a political firestorm in both countries in Ottawa. The documents have rocked the political capitals around the world. The NSA spied on everyone from leaders of U.S. allies to millions of Americans' personal information that had been scooped up literally in permeation of major internet and phone companies. Economic and political espionage. The spying at the Toronto summit in 2010 fits a pattern of economic and political espionage by the powerful U.S. intelligence agencies in its partners such as Canada. That espionage was conducted to secure meeting sites and protect leaders against terrorist threats, possibly Al-Qaeda, but also to forward policy goals of the U.S. and Canada. The G20 summit in Toronto had lots of its agenda that had been of acute interest to the NSA in Canada. The world was still struggling to climb out of the Great Recession, what we call the Great Depression. World leaders were debating a wide array of possible measures, including a global tax on banks, an idea strongly opposed by both U.S. and Canadian governments. The notion was evidently scratched. The secret NSA documents list all the major agenda items for the G20 in Toronto: international development, bank reforms, countering trade protectionism, and so on, with the U.S. snooping agencies promising to support U.S. policy goals. Whatever the intelligence goals of the NSA during the Toronto summit, the International Security Agency's experts questioned whether the NSA's spying operation at the G20 in Toronto was even legal. If the CSEC's tasks NSA to conduct spying activities in Canada within Canada that the ESEC itself was not authorized to take, then I'm comfortable saying that they would be unlawfully undertaken by this is Canadian spy agency NCEC. That's according to Craig Forsyth, an expert in international security at the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law. By law, the CSEC cannot target anyone in Canada without a warrant, including world leaders and foreign diplomats at the G20 summit. The Canadian eavesdropping agency is prohibited by international agreements from getting the NSA to do spying or anything would be illegal for the NSEC. Canada's Five Eye partners. The NSA is not Canada's only partner in covert surveillance business. Their multi-nation partnership includes sister organizations in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, the so-called Five Eyes. The Canadian agency has roughly 2,000 employees and an annual budget of 450 million Canadian. It will soon move into its new Ottawa headquarters, costing the taxpayers more than $1.2 billion. Now, 1.2 billion. The most expensive federal building ever constructed. By comparison, NSA, the largest intelligence agency in the U.S., with a budget over $40 million and employing 40,000 people. That would be a small town or village in the U.S. or in Canada. It could perhaps be a major city. It's currently building what is believed to be one of the largest and most powerful computers in the world. No doubt about that. Continually working on things. The CSEC is comparatively much smaller, but has a formal and sophisticated surveillance outlet. The Canadian droppers are also integrated into the I-5 partners around the world. The documents obtained by CBC do not indicate what, if any, role the CSEC played in spying at the G20. Much of the secret documents is devoted to secret details at the summit, although it notes the intelligence community assesses there is no specific credible information that Al-Qaeda or any Islamic extremists were targeting the event. No doubt. No matter, the NSA warned that the most likely security threat would come from issues-based terrorists conducting acts of vandalism. They got that right. Protesters march by about 10,000 turned Toronto's G20 into historic melee of arrests by more than 20,000 police, as it become one of the largest and most expensive security operations in Canadian history. And by the time the tear gas had cleared, the investigators were complete. Law enforcement agents still accused of mass violations of civil rights. Added to that dubious legacy of illegal spying by an American intelligence agency with the blessings of the Canadian government, my emphasis here, Tory government, CBC contacted the Americans and Canadians for comments, and of course they had nothing to say. The U.S. State Department would not comment directly on spying. Instead, they pointed to the fact that President Obama had ordered a review of the NSA. So, in other words, the silence will be. That is a story from the CBC. We try to cover local news as much as humanly possible from the sources. Our original contact point here was the outlet Al Jazeera. Thus, we move on here. The Honduran presidential election. An investigation is demanded. In the American media, there has been high praise for this right-winger. The Honduras contested results from its 24 in November election threatened to unleash civil unrest and repression that could further destabilize the country amidst widespread allegations of fraud, vote buying, and voting irregularities. That the Tribune Suprema Electra, that's Honduras Electoral Authority, announced November 26 that the Conservative National Party candidate Juan Orlando Hernandez had an irreversible lead. Both Hernandez and the left-leaning Libre Party candidate Xiomara Castro claimed victory on election night. Castro based her claims on a Libre's exit polls that showed a substantial lead. Her husband and former President Mel Zelaya, I suppose, was ousted. Remember him. He was a very colorful person in a 2009 coup, and also contested results, noting that the vote tally from 20% of the polling stations announced by the TSE contradicted the actual vote counted from the polling station. Anti-corruption party candidate Salvador Nesera has also impugned the accuracy of the voting process. In the cloud of election violence and suspicion, outside pressures from the international community, especially the U.S., is critical to ensure that democracy prevails in Honduras. There's no doubt in Honduras the business interests and the business interests in the U.S. are busy, including the spy agencies we just talked about. The presidential and election vote were marred in allegations of fraud, intimidation, violence prior to the election. And what's very interesting here, the U.S. media highlights what they call so-called irregularities in Venezuela under Comandante Munoz. But the problem there is there were none. It was a very close election. We had expected one. This is in Venezuela. But here, this has been irregularity after irregularity in Honduras since the ouster of Xiomara Castro and his government. It's been a continual thing. The people have not been able to vote their conscience. Given their limited capacity, however, it's unlikely for smaller parties to cover all 500 voting centers, some of which have more than 20 voting tables. A TSE official confirmed to a team of international observers the allegations that the National Party was buying credentials from the smaller parties, enabling a dominant president at individual voting tables, raised the possibility of fraud. The Liberty Party representatives reported receiving death threats. All this is a normal activity there. In addition, from a country still living on the clout of the 2009 military coup, the militarization of the election process was disturbing. The presence of heavily armed soldiers at dozens of doors of each bowling place intimidated people. The Honduran National Police, which is no more than a fascist outfit trained in Florida by the U.S., long been that. The U.S. To talk about transparency in government, openness in government, etc., has to clean up its own house of cards. They can't simply go and talk about Venezuela, talk about Iran, talk about various other countries around Syria. This is nothing to these Honduran National Police that have killed thousands of people over the years. And it's fortunate this stuff is now coming out here. What has happened in these countries is now starting to see some of the light by various people. Tegucigalpa, that's the capital of Honduras. Some carbon cooperative workers and National Council of Rural Workers were killed on the 23rd of November. So in other words, people are literally dying here. On the 25th, a day after the election, workers at the public ministry tasked with handling complaints of electoral wrongdoing were sent home. The office was surrounded by the military. The Honduran Accomplishment Project and the La Tribuna newspaper. So in other words, you basically have another military coup going on here. And in 2009, just months after the coup, the U.S. State Department erroneously congratulated President Porfirio Labor even before the polls closed. Well, in other words, the fix was in there. At a meeting last week, the U.S. ambassador to Honduras, Lisa, Krabinsky, told our delegation of accredited international observers from the National Lawyers Guild that the embassy would be cautious in issuing statements in the days after the election. However, on Monday, Krabinsky complimented the transparency of the process and congratulated the Honduran people on what she described as a peaceful election. She must be blind and deaf. In response to concerns about political intimidation, Ambassador Kolinsky indicated that it is extremely difficult to distinguish between targeted and common violence in Honduras in order to achieve redress. She also noted that the U.S. is providing support for a special unit within the public ministry charged with addressing crimes and political persecution of LGBT community. The ambassador's concession of targeted violence against the LGBT community, however, seems inconsistent with her skepticism about identifying ongoing brutal oppression against other groups. Krabinsky's assessment also disregards the fact that many of the murders of civilian leaders and activists and human rights defenders were preceded by death threats. Despite its professional support for the Honduran democracy, the U.S. Would likely prefer a government that would counterbalance the left-leaning governments in the Central and South Americas. Well, this no doubt is something that they're trying to achieve. But now with social media, as a story Pizza Hut found out in the American state of Indiana, in a town called Eckhart, a Pizza Hut worker for 10 years and had become the manager of a small Pizza Hut, refused to open on Thanksgiving, which is an American family holiday. He was literally forced to resign from his job. He went public about it, and it was covered, and you'll hear it in a minute here, by the local TV stations. And it went virtual on social media. And so late on, we covered this story on Bostonred, incidentally, on late Thursday night, the eve, I guess you'd call it, of the family holiday. Pizza Hut said they would ask the franchisee to give the job back to Mr. Roy. Tony Roy was his name. He's a hero. Pizza Hut's a zero. And the traditional day in the U.S. here is a Turkey Day. It's a bit disingenuous because of the nature of the turkeys, but at the same time, in the nature of the day, supposedly it was the idea that the Aboriginal people presented meals to the newcomers, called pilgrims. But however, the pilgrims, newcomers to this, what they call the New World, because they didn't know any better, gave the Aboriginal people smallpox in blankets. That was the first, quote-unquote, massive chemical contamination in this hemisphere. And then set out to slaughter the Aboriginal people. So the Aboriginal people are not giving a lot of thanks today. There's no doubt about that. But this extends to Honduras. The Obama administration must clean this up. They should fire Kavinsky there. And now this sham about the GLBT community, a small community within Honduras, is just one of the things that they put forward at the stake of the larger problem, and that is political oppression and fascism there. Now, they have tried to destabilize Venezuela, Bolivia, and Ecuador, but they have not been that successful, and Honduras is something they cannot get away with. So thus, the things do come to light because of Al Jazeera and various other people of that nature. This is from Lauren Karsick, is a law professor, I believe here, is a clinical professor of law and director of the International Human Rights Clinic at the Western New England University School of Law. So this is her piece here based upon the elections in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. But the CIA has run amok in Honduras and the Central and Latin America. And its a sister agency, the International Development, AID, a notorious ring of criminals, cutthroats, and scumbags. So they've been out there installing dictators and while pretending to help the poor of these countries. They were not. They were helping their own greedy little hands. Nonetheless, this is Bostonred for the Bostonred on the World in the news in 10 on the 28th of November 2013. This program will actually air at 4:30 Eastern Standard Time in the U.S. Good day and have a good weekend where there is a weekend. And to others, Jemar Prayer comes up on Friday. So depending on the calendar as to where you are in the world. Good day.
It's afternoon in America, and a new breed of professionals are getting ready to go to work. What's their job with such flexible hours? Their job is to beat up your job. Meet America's professional protesters. So who are they protesting today? They don't even know yet. So after a tasty breakfast of cold pizza and warm beer, out they go to the front doors of your favorite stores to harass shoppers like you.
Let's protest.
So who are these guys really working for? Union bosses trying to steal your holidays to make political points. And where do they find such highly motivated activists to pass judgment on employers? Why bother with actual employees when such skilled talent is available on couches and coffee shop patios? Who better to speak up for higher wages and better benefits than people who haven't bothered to get jobs themselves? For professional protesters, it's just another day at the office. This Black Friday, just buy your gifts. Don't buy their lies.
They're going to be open this year on Thanksgiving Day, and one local man says he lost his job because of it.
That's right. WSBT's James Fillmore's here. And James, he says he doesn't think people should have to work on a holiday like Thanksgiving.
That's right, Jennifer. His name is Tony Rohr. He worked at Pizza Hut for more than 10 years, but says he was fired recently because he refused to open on Thanksgiving. Tony Rohr started at Pizza Hut as a cook and worked his way up to being a store manager of the Jackson Boulevard Pizza Hut in Elkhart. He was told opening on Thanksgiving this year was mandatory, so at a meeting with his superiors, he decided to take a stand.
I said, well, why can't we be the company that stands up and says we care about our employees and you can have the day off?
Tony says it wasn't about him, it was about his employees. He would not open the restaurant he managed on Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving and Christmas are the only 2 days that they're closed in the whole year. They're only 2 days that those people are guaranteed to have off to spend with their families.
Rohr says he was told to sign a letter of resignation. He refused. Instead, he wrote a letter explaining his position to his boss. He says this is a copy of it. In the letter, he wrote, quote, "I am not quitting. I do not resign. However, I accept that the refusal to comply with this greedy, immoral request means the end of my tenure with this company." His letter went on to say, quote, "I hope you realize that it's the people at the bottom of the totem pole that make your life possible. We tried contacting Pizza Hut's headquarters, but did not hear back." Meanwhile, Rohr's girlfriend and his family support his actions.
I was a little shocked. I kind of thought something would happen, but I wasn't sure, but I'm proud that he did stand up for what he believed in.
Rohr is still unemployed and looking for a new job. He says it was worth it.
They're still going to be open, I'm sure, and they're still going to sell pizza, but I just didn't think it was right.
Now again, I left a message for Pizza Hut's headquarters in Texas, but we never heard back. However, I did speak to one of Rohr's bosses on the phone, who is the director of operations for several Pizza Hut locations in Indiana and Illinois. He tells me Rohr was not fired, but that he quit.
That's not his side of the story, though. That's not what he's saying has happened.
Yeah, it sounds like both sides can't really exactly agree on what did happen. But Rohr says that opening on Thanksgiving, his boss actually said that opening on Thanksgiving wasn't a individual decision, it was a company decision.
Yeah.
And that man also pointed out that Pizza Hut's choice to be open on Thanksgiving is in line with other national and local stores and restaurants. And just in case you're wondering, Rohr plans on spending Thanksgiving with his girlfriend and his parents in South Bend.
At home.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, James, thanks.
You're welcome.
Well, we've gotten dozens of comments reacting to this story on our Facebook page.
Yeah, here's what some of you are saying. Stormy says, I think he should have done this, or done his job. If it was the company decision to do so, then he should have listened. If he was fired because of that, they are in the right.
Angel says, I think he should be happy to just have a job. Does he think hospitals close? Do the police take off? No. There are people everywhere who are working and glad to be. And
Michael thinks there's a bigger issue at play. He says no one respects the holidays or time with family anymore in the corporate world. Money, money, money. Sad. And Tammy says, personally, I think giving them the day off is fair. It's not likely that many people will be eating pizza on Thanksgiving. Now, you can join the conversation by going to our Facebook page, and if you're also interested in learning which